He dropped in one afternoon when she was selling whiskey glasses to Mike Hearn of the Farmers Rest Hotel. They did not write at all during the following semester, and when he came back for the long summer vacation they met on the street one day and exchanged a few rather forced pleasantries. It suddenly dawned on Fanny that he was patronizing her as much as the scion of an aristocratic line banters the housemaid whom he meets on the stairs. She bit an imaginary apron corner and bobbed a curtsy right there on Elm Street, in front of the Courier office, and walked off, leaving him staring. It was shortly after this that she began a queer line of reading for a girl, lives of Disraeli, Spinoza, Mendelssohn, Mozart, distinguished Jews who had found their religion a handicap. The year of her graduation she did a thing for which Winnebago felt itself justified in calling her different. Each member of the graduating class was allowed to choose a theme for a thesis. Fanny Brandeis called hers A Piece of Paper. On Winnebago's Fox River were located a number of the largest and most important paper mills in the country. There were mills in which paper was made of wood fiber, and others in which paper was made of rags. You could smell the sulfur as soon as you crossed the bridge that led to the flats. Sometimes, when the wind was right, the pungent odor of it spread all over the town. Strangers sniffed it and made a wry face, but the natives liked it. The mills themselves were great ugly brick buildings, their windows festooned with dust webs. Some of them boasted high detached tower-like structures where a secret acid process went on. In the early days the mills had employed many workers, but newly invented machinery had come to take the place of hand labor. The rag rooms alone still employed hundreds of girls who picked, sorted, dusted over the great suction bins. The rooms in which they worked were gray with dust. They wore caps over their hair to protect it from the motes that you could see spinning and swirling in the watery sunlight that occasionally found its way through the gray filmed window panes. It never seemed to occur to them that the dust caps so carefully pulled down about their heads did not afford protection for their lungs. They were pale girls, the rag-room girls, with a peculiarly gray-white pallor. Fanny Brandeis had once been through the Winnebago Paper Company's mill, and she had watched, fascinated, while a pair of soiled and greasy old blue overalls were dusted and cleaned, and put through this acid vat and that acid tub, growing whiter and more pulpy with each process, until it was fed into a great crushing roller that pressed the moisture out of it, flattened it to the proper thinness, and spewed it out at last, miraculously, in the form of rolls of crisp, white paper. On the first day of the Easter vacation Fanny Brandeis walked down to the office of the Winnebago Paper Company's mill and applied at the superintendent's office for a job. She got it. They were generally short-handed in the rag room. When Mrs. Brandeis heard of it there followed one of the few stormy scenes between mother and daughter. "Why did you do it?" demanded Mrs. Brandeis. "I had to get it right. Oh, don't be silly. You could have visited the mill a dozen times." Fanny twisted the fingers of her left hand in the fingers of her right, as was her way when she was terribly in earnest and rather excited. "But I don't want to write about the paper business as a process." "Well, then, what do you want?" "I want to write about the overalls on some railroad engineer, perhaps, or the blue calico wrapper that belonged, maybe, to a scrub woman. And how they came to be spotted, or faded, or torn, and finally all worn out. And how the rag man got them, and the mill, and how the girls sorted them, and the room in which they do it, and the bins, and the machinery. Oh, it's the most fascinating and sort of relentless machinery. And the acid burns on the hands of the men at the vats, and their shoes, and then the paper, so white. And the way we tear it up or crumple it and throw it in the waste basket. Just a piece of paper, don't you see what I mean? Just a piece of paper, and yet all that." She stopped and frowned a little and grew inarticulate, and gave it up with a final, "Don't you see what I mean, Mother? Don't you see what I mean?" Molly Brandeis looked at her daughter in a startled way, like one who, walking tranquilly along an accustomed path, finds himself confronting a new and hitherto unsuspected vista, formed by a peculiar arrangement of clouds, perhaps, or light, or foliage, or all three blended. "I see what you mean," she said. "But I wish you wouldn't do it. I wish you didn't feel that you wanted to do it." "But how can I make it real if I don't?" "You can't," said Molly Brandeis. "That's just it. You can't, ever." Fanny got up before 6 every morning of that Easter vacation and went to the mill, lunch box in hand. She came home at night dead tired. She did not take the street car to and from the mill as she might have, because she said the other girls in the rag room walked, some of them from the very edge of town. Mrs. Brandeis said that she was carrying things too far, but Fanny stuck it out for the 2 weeks, at the end of which period she spent an entire Sunday in a hair-washing, face-steaming, and manicuring bee. She wrote her paper from notes she had taken, and turned it in at the office of the high school principal with the feeling that it was not at all what she had meant it to be. A week later Professor Henning called her into his office. The essay lay on his desk. "I've read your thesis," he began, and stopped, and cleared his throat. He was not an eloquent man. "Where did you get your information, Miss Brandeis?" "I got it at the mill." "From one of the employees?" "Oh, no. I work there, in the rag room." Professor Henning gave a little startled exclamation that he turned hastily into a cough. "I thought that perhaps the editor of the Courier might like to see it being local and interesting." He brought it down to the office of the little paper himself, and promised to call for it again in an hour or two, when Lem Davis should have read it. Lem Davis did read it, and snorted, and scuffled with his feet in the drift of papers under his desk, which was a way he had when enraged. "Read it?" he echoed at Professor Henning's question. "Read it? Yes, I read it. And let me tell you it's socialism of the rankest kind, that's what. It's anarchism, that's what. Who's this girl? Mrs. Brandeis's daughter of the bazaar? Let me tell you, I'd go over there and tell her what I think of the way she's bringing up that girl, if she wasn't an advertiser. A piece of paper. Hell!" And to show his contempt for what he had read he wadded together a great mass of exchanges that littered his desk and hurled them, a crumpled heap, to the floor, and then spat tobacco juice upon them. "I'm sorry," said Professor Henning, and rose. But at the door he turned and said something highly unprofessorial. "It's a darn fine piece of writing," and slammed the door. At supper that night he told Mrs. Henning about it. Mrs. Henning was a practical woman, as the wife of a small-town high school principal must needs be. "But don't you know," she said, "that Roscoe Moore, who is president of the Outagamie Pulp Mill and the Winnebago Paper Company, practically owns the Courier?" Professor Henning passed a hand over his hair, ruefully, like a schoolboy. "No, Martha, I didn't know. If I knew those things, dear, I suppose we wouldn't be eating sausage for supper tonight." There was a little silence between them. Then he looked up. "Some day I'm going to brag about having been that Brandeis girl's teacher." Fanny was in the store a great deal now. After she finished high school they sent Mattie away, and Fanny took over the housekeeping duties, but it was not her milieu. Not that she didn't do it well. She put a perfect fury of energy and care into the preparation of a pot roast. After she had iced a cake she enhanced it with cunning arabesques of jelly. The house shone as it never had, even under Mattie's honest regime. But it was like hitching a high-power engine to a butter churn. There were periods of maddening restlessness. At such times she would set about cleaning the cellar, perhaps. It was a 3-room cellar, brick-floored, cool, and having about it that indefinable cellar smell, which is of mold, and coal, and potatoes, and onions, and kindling wood, and dill pickles, and ashes. Other girls of Fanny's age, at such times, cleaned out their bureau drawers, and read forbidden novels. Fanny armed herself with the third best broom, the dustpan, and an old bushel basket. She swept up chips, scraped up ashes, scoured the preserve shelves, washed the windows, cleaned the vegetable bins, and got gritty, and scarlet-cheeked, and streaked with soot. It was a wonderful safety valve, that cellar. A pity it was that the house had no attic. Then there were long, lazy summer afternoons when there was nothing to do but read, and dream, and watch the town go by to supper. I think that is why our great men and women so often have sprung from small towns, or villages. They have had the time to dream in their adolescence. No cars to catch, no matinees, no city streets, none of the teeming, empty, energy-consuming occupations of the city child. Little that is competitive, much that is unconsciously absorbed at the most impressionable period, long evenings for reading, long afternoons in the fields or woods. With the cloth laid, and the bread cut and covered with a napkin, and the sauce in the glass bowl, and the cookies on a blue plate, and the potatoes doing very, very slowly, and the kettle steaming with a peerybingle cheerfulness, Fanny would stroll out to the front porch again to watch for the familiar figure to appear around the corner of Norris Street. She would wear her blue and white checked gingham apron deftly twisted over one hip and tucked in deference to the passers-by, and the town would go by, Hen Cody's drays rattling and thundering, the high school boys thudding down the road, dog-tired and sweaty in their football suits or their track pants and jerseys, on their way from the athletic field to the school shower baths. Mrs. Mosher flying home, her skirts billowing behind her after a protracted afternoon